I think how I want to start this episode is even just taking a moment to notice my nervousness.
Mm.
Um, Again, because it is the experiential podcast, I am practicing what I teach, which is pausing and noticing what I'm experiencing. And yeah, it's funny how there's a fair amount of nervousness because I don't actually get nervous that often. Um, and yeah, I'm noticing my heart beating a fair amount and um, the sense of yeah, with me noticing it, I just took a breath and I feel myself settling a little bit. And I mean, I'm here with someone I feel extremely connected to, and that is helpful with my nervousness. And I'm really grateful to have you as my first guest, Chris. And for those that don't know Chris Dierkes, you will learn a lot about him and the way he works and his perspectives throughout this episode. But you have been someone who has definitely really shaped my practice. Um, you've really helped me find my own way into understanding my own human experience and other people's human experience and the complexity and the beauty of it all. And I'm so grateful for so much of what I've learned through you. I mean, everything that I've learned through you. It's really helped me land in myself and understand the multiple realities that exist within myself and with such grace and such beauty and um, the way you helped me find my sense of wholeness even though I knew what it was but I didn't have the words for it and didn't have conscious awareness of it. I really found that working through you allowed me to create that spaciousness that comes from recognizing that I'm already whole, and it just allowed me to be in the messiness and the chaos, which I still find myself in. But I'm able to hold it with so much more grace. And it's definitely because of a lot of the work I've done with you. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
It's really touching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No
And thank you
problem.
for having me.
hmm I know. I find that when I have a call with you, I feel connected to you in like many dimensions. So I always
Yeah,
enjoy time with you because I feel like there's so many more conversations going on other than just this voiced conversation. So, yeah, I'm excited to see where our conversation goes today. And my invitation for people listening is to also tune into their experience as they're listening to pick up on like the multi-dimensional conversations we can have and the ways we can experience ourselves through words. So, yeah.
beautiful.
I want to start with us on a very light topic, just exploring what oh, how do I want to word this? Like in the human experience, to me, there's many layers, and three of the layers that you speak to so beautifully is self, soul, and spirit, and the interconnectedness of those three pieces. So I'd love for you to speak a little to each of those, like what is self, what is soul, what is spirit?
Oh yeah. Okay. That's a good place to start. Thanks.
Mhm.
And so yeah, we could use different lingo. That's the lingo I tend to be familiar with. Other, it's basically a variation that exists in a number of different lineages. So I like points where a number of different traditions and lineages, I think, all end up pointing to the same thing, even though they'll have slightly different languaging and nuancing. I think there's something when a number of fingers are pointing in the same general spot, then I take that to be somebody's onto something.
Totally. And I think
So
that's why
this,
I like the experiential piece because it's like, well, all these different ways of approaching things. It's like, well, if we're experiencing the same thing but have different
yeah,
words for it, then how
we're
beautiful
onto
is that?
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So other traditions would use different lingo, but for much of the same kind of deep underlying wisdom, I think. So self, small s self, is really sort of code word for our humanness. So that includes our somatics, that includes the body and the body's wisdom, as well as our human psychology, our personality, our just the humanness of this whole thing. that we're here.
Would you weave our trauma into that as well, of like where we're stuck still trying to survive? That's kind of at the self level.
Yeah, that's certainly one variation that can show up there.
Mhm.
There's healthier variations too, which would show up
Yeah.
um, in, for example, the Buddhist tradition, they would speak of the body mind.
Mhm.
So there's body embodiment and also consciousness. And so when versus this kind of idea of like, I have a body, or the body's treated sort of as an object, instead when it becomes subject,
Yeah.
then we get a more integrative space that has a lot more spontaneity and resilience and intrinsic motivation and creativity, just in a
Yeah.
really healthy human, functional, adaptive, enjoyable human life.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. And obviously, any dysregulation aspects on any of these levels that we're going to talk about.
Hmm. I'm glad you named that, because that was one of
Yeah.
the questions wanted to weave in. The trauma can show up in any of the pieces.
Yeah.
The dysregulation is there in many forms.
So we think of these three really, I invite people to think of it as imagine it as a really long spectrum, like a horizontal line, rather than thinking of it vertically. Because as soon as we start thinking of it vertically, then there's going to be higher and lower and better and worse and all that. So if you think of it as a horizontal line, and maybe on one side of the spectrum is more the self energy, in the middle would be soul, which is the unique, the truly unique aspects of a being, not the culturally conditioned. Everybody has to be unique. We're all a unique thing, but like, no, actually, we're all actually fundamentally singular. Um, so traditions that orient to that dimension of the human would be classically like indigenous medicine traditions, usually, or energy healing, or what people call shamanic. Um, yeah, animistic wisdom that would involve soul journeys and relationships with the ancestral field and the story, the coding one came in with, and hero's journey, heroine's journey, or you say like that's kind of the soul realm.
And would you say that's like you do some soul blueprint work in many different forms? That's what you're kind of speaking to. We could put astrology into that. We could put gene keys, human design into that, all these different aspects that kind of show like this is our blueprint. This is who I am, or what I'm here to be doing or
Being
be learning.
express. Yeah. Yeah. And it also includes, well, quite a lot of our influence from our ancestry
Mm.
and the
Not
ability, yeah,
uh,
to make sure that that's more in a clarified, free state in our being rather than we're being lived unconsciously by, you know, in like deep time. We're talking deep memory
mhm,
here.
mhm.
Who we are in our dreams,
Yeah.
what shows up in our dreams when we're in wild spaces, when nature starts interacting with us, when people go to, you know, work with horses and the horses will read their energy and will respond accordingly. We're in a dream space now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of just clarify with the
Mm,
ancestral pieces, like the
mm,
ancestral wisdom that comes through is kind of what I feel in that, here in that. That's very different than my ancestral patterning and the conditioning that gets passed on. That to me is more at the self level versus the
There's
wisdom.
a bit of both. I mean, it can really
Yeah.
be if there's like in constellations work, families or systems constellation type
Yeah.
work, when there's some deep story in a family lineage, a secret, a taboo, a trauma that's unconsciously living people,
Hmm.
it's a form to me of soul work to
Right.
transmute that
Right.
for
That's a
sure.
good point. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can relate to that piece big time. So
Yeah.
I see
So
many
the
layers of it in
yeah.
both layers of self and soul. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And the well ancestor, when we're talking about kind of the spirits of benevolence or the energies of benevolence in our lines, that's obviously important to link to. And if there's
Yeah,
any that are in need of some healing, then the first step usually is to be able to help in a healthy way differentiate ourselves and have some
totally.
space.
It's one of my
And
favorite things to I've been
yeah.
having so many ancestral pieces come up lately, and I'm just
Mm.
like, this is fun
Yeah.
because it is easier to differentiate, and then I could just
Right.
support the
Yeah.
healing in that, but not
Right.
get entangled. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still part of me, and I'm still entangled in some way, but yeah,
Yeah,
that differentiation piece is key.
for
Yeah.
sure. And I think often the soul work side of things or the soul process side of things is one that has, it's starting to come more into, at least in some quarters, certain awareness, but has generally been kind of the lost, the middle child here. And that
Mm,
setup, I think it's usually been kind of the forgotten character, but it's starting to get a little more common in certain circles, particularly like through plant medicine, because that's
mhm.
getting more popular. That's one doorway. It's not the only doorway. That's one traditional doorway.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And then spirit, so along our continuum, along our line here, the spectrum, sort of on the other end of the spectrum, spirit would be meditation and classic teachings of spiritual awakening, really. And spirit, I would define as the universal dimension rather than soul to me is quite singular to each
Mhm,
being.
mhm,
Spirit is more universal. So it has the plus side of really in its best moments emphasizing humility. We're all children of God, or we're all from the same source, we're all one. It was meant to really in the best kind of emphasize everybody's in the same boat here, everybody's equal. There's no higher, lower kind of thing. On the flip side, it's for each of them, their strength is their limitation, right?
mhm,
They're
mhm.
doing one thing and they're not doing the other things, which is fine if we have a view that incorporates enough of the different aspects so that they can all do their gift and not have to be everything in all things. They can just focus on the one zone that they're focused on. So, um, spiritual teaching can go a little sideways when it's treated as our true and real self, and the other stuff is treated as our false self.
Mm, mhm,
And then we're trying to get rid of our ego, like that's just your ego thing, that's a problem. Um, and also because it's a universal, it's non-personal. It's the same for
mhm.
all of us. So if it gets pushed too far, it tends to show up with a lot of like conformity kind of stuff. Because everybody should look the same and everybody shave their heads and everybody wear the same drab clothes. Everybody wake up at the same time and eat the
Yeah,
same meal. Like it can get very conformist pretty fast because a universal aspect is now being pitched as the archetype for everybody to conform themselves to.
totally. Which then is just structure again instead of this,
Instead of a fuller scope of,
yeah,
and
expression. Yeah.
yeah, I think so I often say that like spirit to me, for an analogy for people that consider try to feel their experiences, there's one sun and there's one light. All the rays of that sun are the same essence. It's the one light.
Mhm,
But the rays are really distinct as rays. And so spiritual teaching to me is about the one sun and the one light at the one sun. And soul work and soul teaching is really about how to embody that one light in the unique ray that each of us would be.
mhm.
And in that
Yeah,
way, they can support each other rather than be one or the other.
yeah, I love that. What I also find helpful in that is like there's many individual rays, but there's also like almost a spectrum of rays where some of us kind of fall more in, this spectrum of the ray, and others are in a very different spectrum of the ray, and how that allows us to see these different ways we're here and that we're really not all the same light. We're just a source of that same light. And yeah, the spectrum of the different versions of that.
Mhm.
I really find that helpful in seeing other people in the way they're showing up in the world, and that it's like, oh, well, that's just a very different Ray than me. It does,
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a very different way.
Distinct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, colors of the rainbow or whatever we like
Yeah.
is definitely to really own our own radical singularity
Mhm.
is really what actually frees up the best space, as you were just saying there in a really beautiful way, to allow other people to be themselves, really. Because we're not in a comparison game now. We're not in a there's no one standard criteria that everybody's like, oh, are you higher on the ladder? Are you lower? Did you get a better grade? Did you get lower? Like that's
Exactly.
not there. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the question is he the question would be for each of us, are we to the best of our degree possible? And as a kind of process, are we growing into the nature of our own specific light
Mm. Yeah. Beautiful.
while being human,
Yeah.
while still being really human?
Very human.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
So what I want to invite people to reflect on in that is like in these pieces of like small self, of soul and
Mhm.
spirit, like what lands. And because for me, there's a really felt sense to each of those
Right.
experiences, to each of those pieces where I can feel I can feel them as separate, but I can feel them as intertwined, and there's no edges to either of any of them. There's this weaving of the three components in a way that really allow me to move through the world and recognize like, oh, there I am in small self, or oh, there I am experiencing that expansiveness, at least that's
Right.
how I feel it, of spirit, and oh, here I am in this expression of soul, right? And it's such a beautiful way to move through the world with that awareness for me, because it's allows continuous curiosity of how am I showing up here, and how do I weave the three into my conscious awareness and create that fuller expression of that, like you're saying, like really kind of be that ray of light instead of kind of
Mhm.
more one or more the other, and really, yeah,
Mhm.
and that, yeah, weaving of those three feels important to me in this moment.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you named that.
Yeah.
And if we got our line and we have our sort of spectrum, and for sure, sort of conceptually, we can go, okay, self, soul, spirit, like they're three nice, TD, nice and tidy boxes, but there's all kinds of zones where they overlap.
Hmm.
But also, we could just imagine drawing one really big circle around the whole line. And then that circle creates the sense of I am all of the above,
Hmm.
rather than we're looking for, okay, well, which is the real me and which is the deeper one and which is the true one and which is the false one, and doing that whole slice and dice game. Instead, you just say, like you're doing there, like checking in, like, what's my humanness saying in this relationship to this experience? What's my
Hmm.
soul got to say? And how does my spirit experience this? And that opens up this fourth space or process or dynamic that, to keep the S's in some way is fun, is to call it sovereignty.
Hmm.
And that's to me where choice really exists. The self is gonna self, the soul is gonna soul, and the spirit's gonna spirit. That's just
I love
who they are, how they
it.
roll.
Yeah.
And to me, this sovereign dimension, which is the one that can be aware of all of them and weave, as you're saying, between and through and bring them all together in kind of a triple braid, like that's the one that actually has choice. That
I
can
love
say,
that.
okay, here's what my humanity feels about the situation, and it can be that's why it's a wide spectrum, and we can take all kinds of fun topics like, time as a fun
Mm.
one for people to play with and
Oh
explore.
God.
Like, like the self's experience of time is very linear and tends to be more immediate and can be like, oh my God, I gotta get all this stuff done. I got all these appointments or blah, blah, blah. And then the soul's experience of time is like generations and lifetimes, and it gets like fun and dreamy and fluid and Salvador Dali like clocks melting on the wall. Like it can be like non-linear, and the past is, harkens to the future, and the future creates the past, and whatever. And then the spirit part is like there's no time.
Mhm.
Everything's eternal or timeless. And so instead of saying which one is right, the sovereign approach, the fun, sort of paradoxical, playful approach is to say they're all right and then live with this really fascinating kind of rub or creative friction of like all of those options are true depending on which one we're looking from.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because my relationship with time has been so weird the last couple of years. So hearing you put weird words to that is really helpful because I am lost in not, I don't want to say lost, but I experienced myself in all three of those components. So to hold it with more of that awareness of the sovereignty feels of my sovereign being within that, of the choice of how I'm navigating my relationship when I'm in it, and when I'm a little more in the chaos of time and the limit
Yeah.
of it versus the infinite experience of it. Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for picking time on that one.
Yeah. It's a lighthearted, this other space allows some room to breathe and some lightheartedness because we again are getting to retain the humanity throughout. We're not trying to negate or transcend or any of the things. Like the humanness is going to remain. So it's going to be wild and weird and mysterious and like, I don't know, this is my best little map. And I'm trying my best here. And the
Yeah.
soul's going to have its depth and the spirit's going to bring its deep stillness. And it's
Mhm.
just the fun of like what happens when we I don't know, put those. That's a spicy jambalaya. Like you put those
Totally.
you get to use. It's an
100%.
interesting and it's an interesting meal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm feeling in that is like the more we're in the weave of it, the more we're in that sovereignty, then there's choice and there isn't this sense of like urgency. And that's where the humanity lies, really, right? Because I find if we veer more into one side of things, like if we're maybe caught more in that sense of the spirit piece, that's where we're going to then bypass, right? And that's where
Sure.
we kind of get lost in, yeah, in the infinite, or in the bypassing and the loss of sense of reality and responsibility and
Yeah.
even agency and self, right?
Right.
And then the other end of the spectrum, it's like if I'm too caught in self, in a way, that's where I'm caught in the always seeking, trying to fix something's wrong with me. You know,
Yeah.
there's I mean, maybe it's not that simple where it's just one or the other, but that's what's standing out to me. If I'm kind of living more in one layer versus the other layer, I'm probably gonna see that in the way I'm showing up in my life and the patterns I find myself caught in.
Yeah. There's a truth to each of the three, but also a partiality.
Hmm.
And if it becomes the exclusive or primary, any of them, doesn't matter. Like you're saying, it will show up differently if one's over top the other ones. It'll depend on which one's on top and which one's on bottom or whatever. But the kind of same piece is the structural piece. There's now a division being set up, and there's now a sort of internal fracture and hierarchy being set up between the better and the worse, and the true and the false, and the whatever. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's just sort of the technicals of which one's on top and which one's on bottom. Sure, it'll
Yeah.
look different in terms of the sort of surface features, but the deeper structural similarity will be that fragment from the beginning. And
Hmm.
so to me, this model is an attempt to really offer like, let's reconcile with ourselves.
Hmm. There
And
isn't something
then
on the top and the bottom.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's spherical. There's way more. There's bubbles within a sphere, and then they can play and they can interact, and
Yeah.
so it just allows for all the different parts or aspects or attributes of our being, of our multidimensional being, to all have a home and all have a place.
Hmm. Yeah.
That place isn't that they're meant to be in the driver's seat. I often think of it as like the tour bus. It's like our
Hmm.
tour bus can be filled with a lot of
Yep.
characters.
Sure can be.
Barreling down the road on a
Yeah.
fun magical mystery tour, but there does need to be a decent driver.
Yeah.
And or if you like a slightly different version of that, it's, each being is like this fascinating symphony.
Yeah.
But you definitely need a conductor.
Yeah.
Um, Otherwise, it's just a whole bunch of instruments playing off different sheet music and trying to drown
Exactly.
each other out, and it's a bit
Exactly.
discordant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So would you say then that the driver is,
sovereignty.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
And in that way, I think it's really important that, I mean, you can treat it like another voice or character if you like, but in some ways it's that, but you can also say it's, as you said, the weaving and the flow itself.
Yeah.
It's almost more dynamic. Riding a bike or something, you're not, okay, I'm gonna think through all the steps first, and then I'm gonna and then I mapped out like you have a basic idea where you're going, and then
Yeah.
the road will change, and then you gotta be just agile and making choices as you go and flexing.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to just point out, like, when you talk about more the linear line and
Hmm.
the circle that encompasses all of that, when we're in
Hmm.
that sense of sovereignty and holding all the layers of it, to me there just feels there's this spaciousness to it and this ease to it. And when you were talking more about the layers and something being on top, and like, to me it felt like this, like, yeah, just that's
Yeah.
the
Right.
like, too much effort, too much struggle, like this constant battle of like, who am I and how do I figure this out? And
Right.
like, I just wanted to name that as an opportunity for others to maybe reflect as well on like this difference between what you're speaking to
Hmm.
versus maybe other ways of approaching things that is a little more like get rid of the ego, or you know
Where the whole spiritual realization is just a projection of infantile, like a Freudian kind of thing, that is all, well,
totally.
is all just projection and in infancy wish fulfillment for some big mommy or daddy in the sky to take care of. Like there's
Yeah.
so many versions that will take one or another of those three and then say
Yes.
this is the real one and the other ones are false.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yeah,
Ugh.
you're right. Yeah, that's right. That's the right response to that.
Wholeness is a word you
Mhm.
introduced me to,
Mhm.
and um, it's a word I speak to a fair amount. Like, one of my principles is you're already whole. How would you weave wholeness into what we're speaking to here? Because to me, wholeness is slightly different than sovereignty.
Yeah, I think of them as different aspects or complementary aspects of this fourth dynamic, this
Mhm.
integrative dynamic. So the sovereignty emphasizes, I think, the sense of choice and um, conductor of one's own symphony,
Mhm.
and really like sit in your throne,
Mhm.
be the king or the queen or the sovereign of your own reality, which doesn't mean you control all reality. It's not some ridiculous notion of omniscience, like I
That'd be
said in the,
nice.
yeah.
Make life a lot easier.
As the riding the bike example, you don't control the weather, the dogs that run
Yeah.
out, the other
Yeah.
traffic. Like we have sovereign choice in terms of our areas of our own power and agency and responsibility. And then there's how we respond to things that are usually out of our control.
Mhm. Mhm.
So sovereignty, I think, is really emphasizing that side. That really like there's no system from above that's going to come and tell us how to live our lives. Like we actually really get to discover and choose it for ourselves from that space.
Yeah.
Wholeness to me is emphasizing the sense of all the parts of the inner family, if you want to call it that, are super duper welcome.
Mm.
And that something happens that's greater than the sum of the parts, the more of our aspects, whether they're in the self part, they're more in the soul part, they're more in the spiritual part, or some combination, the more of these aspects of ourself that we gather, welcome, sort of bring home,
Mhm.
maybe ones we were told were bad and they got pushed down and now they want to come home, or we just never even knew they were there. Then it's like a surprise, surprise, here's part
Yeah.
of your incarnation,
What?
and
Yeah.
this is part of me.
Yeah.
Um, the more of those get to be welcome and get to live together, there's a fullness, a deeper richness and wholeness to our experience. But
Mhm.
again, is very, very different and has a different feel about it, like you're correctly naming, than any setup where one's going to be on top and the others are derivative or false. And it doesn't matter which is on top and which is on bottom. And just say, like, I often quote this line from Walt Whitman: I am vast, I contain multitudes.
Mm.
I love that one.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
So one of the key words there is contain.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean there's just a bunch of pieces flying around willy or nilly and they're just shooting off in all directions and
Yeah.
fragmenting. That's not helpful. But it's also not, I'm just this one thing and all this other stuff is false.
Yeah.
We're all large, we're all vast, and we contain multitudes of various dimensions of ourselves, and we're just trying to actually be like welcoming, and wholeness is really like the more the merrier here.
Hmm. And that's where, you said fragmenting is like, oh, we're not fragmented, but sometimes it can be experienced as a fragment where it's like, well, like this piece of me I didn't even know existed comes forward, or, the, to me, I often see a lot of aspects as stuck in time, right? They're stuck,
Mm,
still surviving whatever they're caught in. And
right.
it's kind of like there's a fragmented piece or a reality that exists that's stuck in time. And to me, what happens when we connect into that sense of wholeness, or we hold that container of wholeness,
Mm,
it's this coherent field for those pieces that are caught in time, or not even in the existence or in the awareness of the container. It allows those pieces to come forward and to be integrated back into the whole. So uh, I don't know if that lands in the way you work, but like to me it is sometimes experienced like a fragment that just has yet to be integrated, but it's not outside of me. It's still always a part of the whole. It just hasn't yet integrated.
that's really well said.
Yeah,
That's really beautifully said. So it's a really, it's bubbles within bubbles, spheres within
exactly.
spheres.
Yeah,
And from inside one sphere, it may seem or appear as if it's outside
yeah,
of
totally.
a space, but actually from the bigger big circle, you're right. It is actually still within. And that's really important as to whether we can shift our perspective. Because if we're inside a part, if you want to call it that, or a bubble here, that feels itself to be completely like fragmented, that can be a very disorienting and
Mhm.
discombobulating kind of experience. Whereas if we can approach it from the resource state of the bigger circle,
Yeah,
it's like this part feels alienated, or this part feels disconnected, or this part senses itself to be fragmented.
yeah,
That it's giving validity to the experience of that part
yeah,
without allowing that part to become the whole. So we're
exactly.
not saying it's wrong, but we're also not saying it's the final truth either.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I actually got from you is um recognizing that bigger circle as me and my wholeness. And yes, I've got small circles within it that are those chaotic experiences that are stuck in time, that are have carry certain burdens, or whatever it is. And I find that a lot of people have yet to discover what that experience is. And most people live as like the big circle is them in their chaos, is them in their patterning and in their um, dysregulation ultimately. And they might understand this concept of wholeness, but it's perceived as this like small circle inside the big chaos. And yeah, something I believe it was you offered me
Mhm.
was the switch of like, well, what if the circle is whole and just the small circle inside that circle is you and your patterns, or you in the chaos. And that has actually really helped me shape one of my maps, which is like, okay, yeah, and the inside of the circle is the trauma. And then we've
Mhm.
got our survival patterns that's, support
Mhm.
us in not feeling the pain, the panic, the terror, all the components of whatever we're stuck in with our trauma. And
Mhm.
then we have the dynamic of how we feel towards our survival patterns and the way we move through the world. But then when we can hold it in that bigger circle of that sense of wholeness, or as the empathic witness, then
Mhm.
then we really get to hold the many realities that exist inside our experience. But we can create that spaciousness to hold it instead of getting lost in those many internal layers, right?
I really appreciate. I love that you said empathic witness there.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a really, it's a really
because to
lovely
me that is
phrase.
wholeness, right?
That
It's like,
is
ah,
wholeness.
and we can think we're being the empathic witness in one of those inner layers.
Right.
And the key is to notice when we're like trying to fix it or have it be different, or, but it's that when we're really the empathic witness, we are just in this spaciousness of being whole and holding that container for all the many other realities that exist. Something else that has been really powerful in me kind of mapping out in this way is like, well, outside of the wholeness, then also lies the infinite love and the infinite sorrow.
Mhm.
And there's just, yeah, the more we kind of find that sense of wholeness and experience ourselves as a sovereign being, the more we also access that love and that sorrow. And I think that's so juicy and
Mhm.
yeah, I yeah. So I just wanted to add that to the map and the conversation here.
No, I really appreciate you naming a number of points there you said I think are really key. One, the distinction between thinking being empathic, deep spaciousness versus that's the cover story. And
Yep.
the reality for a moment might be more any orientation to fix, engineer, make different. Even language of like healing and clearing, which sounds more conscious, can be another cover story for fix, which is obviously then rooted in that fundamental notion of brokenness.
Mhm. And I
And
find
I'll go ahead.
I was just going to say, I find most people probably can relate to this more than
Yeah,
that sense of wholeness and sovereignty and the empathic
yeah,
witness. So,
yeah.
um,
And I think the value, one of the most important values of it's very counterintuitive as to how transformation really occurs. I usually prefer the word transformation to healing, but
mm,
that's my word for what people probably call healing. Um, the way it actually works is first complete and fundamental unconditional positive self-regard and nurturance,
mm,
and just deeper layers of empathy for ourselves, for each other, for our experience. And the cultural noise or conditioning says that such an approach will be narcissistic, such an approach will be self-indulgent and will make us, all me. I just need more love all day. Everybody
mhm.
just and be irresponsible and just want to be takers. But the truth is for anybody who's ever really experienced profound empathy, the real form, that is fundamentally this huge container of incredible benevolence and fundamental acceptance as is.
Mhm.
that's actually, as you said earlier, what creates a coherent tone.
Yeah.
It's like a really big tuning fork that's precisely set. It's ding, like a perfect bell.
Yeah.
And then all the other parts start to go, oh, that sound is really nice. That feels really nice. What is that's weird. It's different. It's a different. What is that? And it's actually the space of unconditional positive self-regard and profound empathy and nurturance that actually creates the safety such that the parts actually then grow, that they get unstuck in time, that they actually evolve, that they actually come into greater integrity and alignment. And so it's the complete opposite of the like put on your big boy, big girl pants at
Mhm.
school. That you got to be like tough and you like life is tough and you got to toughen up and all this kind of stuff. Or we're all just these wounded beings and no one can ever be asked to be step up to the plate. It's actually completely the opposite. It's like the unconditional love and deep nurturing is what creates the energy to actually motivate and change and grow because it's not coming from, oh my God, I'm broken, I need to get fixed. It's I'm whole, and here's a part that isn't yet aware and doesn't yet feel that wholeness. So let's just bring the wholeness to that space until that space goes, relaxes into this bigger spaciousness.
And what I love about that is it's actually easy, you know? Not saying it's not challenging and difficult and
It's
messy,
simple. It's
but it's
simple.
simple. Simple is probably a
It's
better word
simple.
for it. Like there's something with that that, yeah, just makes it so much like we're not butting heads with ourselves. We're not in conflict with ourselves. We're not, yeah, it's not a fight. There's a simplicity to it. Again, it's not that it's not messy. At
Yeah,
least
and
my
it's
experience has
sometimes
definitely been
it's
messy.
challenging sometimes
Yeah.
to say simple, but
Yeah.
you're right, it's not overly complicated. It
Yeah.
actually does bring things down to, I think, a more distilled space of elegant simplicity.
Yeah.
And I also appreciated really deeply that you said that as that occurs, as the noise and some of the discordance starts to reduce, and I would say that that noise is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
As that comes down, what actually comes up is greater tenderness.
Mm.
Like the feeling tones actually get stronger and deeper because the suffering and some of the numbness is wearing off. So
100%.
so yeah, the happiness is happier and the joy is sweeter and the sorrow is sadder and the grief is more piercing. And
Yeah.
it's really a package deal.
Yeah, it really is. I remember when I first started to work with you, one of the pieces I really wanted to work with is feeling more. Like,
Mm,
one of my patterns, and it's definitely ancestral, is rooted in being strong, independent women, and everything's fine, and definitely flavors of bypassing, right? And it's like, for me, it's like I know there's emotion that exists, but I can only kind of feel the depth of it, that kind of like a couple inches of depth to the feeling emotion. And something I want to point out is like, I mean, I am still well on this journey, and I feel like I'm only just starting to kind of maybe have like a foot and a half of depth
mm,
into emotion now. And like, I feel it in like, I feel it as I'm speaking about it in my heart. There's this rawness to it. And it's taking time. And I can't imagine it not taking time because otherwise it would be too much. And the importance of like letting the unfolding happen in the way it needs to unfold. Well, of course, becoming aware of the ways I get in my own way and all of that, but like this gentle unfolding and thawing that's happening for me, and that it's not just a ripping the band-aid off and then all of a sudden things are different. It's like I really do think it's important for us to recognize that, because I find so many people are seeking for like things to be different so dramatically, and it's like, well, this is a process and we probably have lifetimes to figure it out. So just that that I wanted to invite people to recognize that, yeah, it's a slow process. And the reason why we're numb or disconnected or frozen to feeling certain layers is like, thank goodness, because
Mm.
it would be a lot otherwise.
It would be.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you bringing in the sense of, um, yeah, it's, I think, a quality of grace that because it's not this, oh my God, oh my God, I need to get fixed now. It's like
Hmm.
we're whole and we're trying to sink into the wholeness. And it's really important, I think, that because we're including the humanity as an integral part of this whole equation,
Hmm.
that has something to add. It's not just the extra bit that we have to include. Like, it's actually bringing something to the party here.
Yes.
And what it brings to the party is, among other things, is like to allow it to feel humane.
Mm.
Any
Yeah.
traditions that are going to deny the value of what it actually takes for the body to incorporate and digest properly experience inevitably creates kind of like self-flagellation, like trying to push
100%.
oneself beyond limits and not honoring the limits because they're, oh, that's your resistance, so like toughen up, again, any of this, or spiritually versions of that, which is like this very hardcore asceticism, and make like that's just my sinful self and those are my desires and I've transcended that, it can be very ruthless, it can be very violent to ourselves and to each other. And here we're trying to actually have peace,
Yeah.
like real peace with ourselves and each other.
Well, and I find that when we find that, then we can work within whatever modality we're practicing with such a different in such a different flavor. Like it makes me think of psychedelics. And if you work with psychedelics with that mentality of wanting things to be different and just like push and go and like I should just drink more ayahuasca, like you know the the ruptures that I have seen happen in that, especially when there isn't support for integration and all of that, it's quite messy and discombobulating and
Mhm.
can really mess with people's lives. And I'm using psychedelics as an example. There's many other examples we could put into this, but when we have that sense of humanity and in a way even humility, we can work with these practices in such a different way. Like to me, it has allowed me to really know my edges and work with whatever the support system is to explore what else is possible instead of like, yeah, disconnecting from myself to dive in and figure it out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I often say that the body and the emotions, particularly the sensation and the emotion, should be the pace car.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually the opposite. So I didn't do the plant medicine thing in my 20s. I did the hardcore meditation, spiritual awakener thing in my 20s, and I really messed myself up.
Mm-hmm.
I had quote unquote all the experiences, or at least plenty of them, but I couldn't hold it.
Yeah.
And the rubber band got stretched really wide, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. And then
Yeah.
and the snapback was brutal.
Yeah.
And it was all predicated on the notion that I was really trying to like treat the body like it was this uh, older that I was just trying to like push along, and it was just a rock of resistance. And I was just instead of like, this is a place of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. This is a part of me. This is something I need to listen to.
And in particular, if we set it at the pace that works for kind of the deep current of the body, like the long tide, then it does feel more spacious and smooth and gradual because it's actually going to be at the pace that's digestible.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
you know, one of those classic French or Chinese 10-course meals. You eat them over like hours. You don't eat the
Yeah.
thing in 10
All at
minutes
once.
or you'll
No,
get a terrible stomach ache.
exactly.
And there's a lot of bad stomach ache stuff going on, whether it's in personal growth or plant medicine or spiritual stuff or whatever, which is really not taking seriously the pace and the rhythm that a more organic human mode wants to go at.
Yeah.
And the mind can get sped up, and the emotions, if they're dysregulated, can get sped up, and then that creates all this kind of false urgency, etc. And a huge part of it is actually slowing way down.
Yeah. Which is funny because a lot of people don't know how to slow down, you know? And and sometimes it takes that big thing that happens for them to then slow down. But my hopes are that people don't need the big thing to
Yeah.
happen for them to slow down, for yeah, them to really, come into the experience of themselves and learn those edges and learn the language of like, ooh, what am I really pushing through here? And what happens if I back off and really be in what my reality is right now and let that be my learning guide? Yeah,
Yeah. I think it's so important to have these two hands or the two pillars or whatever you want to say is the one is like complete deep acceptance and
yeah,
nurturance and total unconditional positive self-regard and empathy in the present moment. And that's what creates like real courage, tenacity, grit in the best sense of like, yeah, there's going to be some stuff we're all going to have to step into that's going to be a little beyond my current comfort zone.
yeah, exactly.
But you're doing that, you find where the current comfort zone is, and then you're just once you feel really safe first in the current comfort zone, then it's like,
Yeah,
okay, let's just see what like 2% or 5%, a little bit more than that is.
exactly.
And then
And
just
that's
hang there for a bit, and then hang
exactly.
back and you like just really titrate it.
Yeah. And that's where I love like listening to my physiology and well
Mm,
my whole human experience really, but like there's so much we can really tune into that shows us when we're in the safety and when we're at that 2 or 5%. And the more we play within those subtle experiences and the more we learn to listen to those subtle nuances that we experience, the more we can really be in the fluid experience of it instead of these, yeah, looking for these big experiences where we're pushing ourselves more to 60, 70%. So
right.
the
And
listening
then
is
snap back later.
exactly, exactly. Snapback is real.
And unpleasant and
Uh-huh.
not recommended.
No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think it's crucial that the beauty of trying to incorporate the animistic and the great soul wisdom teachings and the beauties of the great spiritual awakening teachings. But those traditions did not have the language and the understanding we now have of things like interpersonal neurobiology and attachment
Exactly.
theory and somatic regulation and all the good fancy. And really, for those teachings, my view is that for those teachings to be in their best preserved and retained and transmitted and carried forward as I think they ought to be, because there's such deep, immense wisdom in those traditions
Yes.
about their specific zones of focus. Genius. They need the upgrade, they need the update because we have way more information now on the small s self side of the street. And
Yes.
that information has to modify and update the soul and the spirit. Just
Yeah.
has to.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. And we're slowly making our way there, but I think we're a ways away.
But yeah, it's really just scratching the surface. But
100%.
but I think it's yeah, for sure. I think it's a multi-generational calling, but this we got to start somewhere. So, but
Yeah.
I think just even being able to name it as such that that's what it is really important because there's something for me that just has a ring of just oh that's right.
Yeah.
And when I hear any, which are not too often, but the occasional time that I get some pushback relative to that statement, it just sounds like the wrong note. Like it just really sounds like somebody who's playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you can just tell they hit the wrong note. Like,
Yeah.
ouch, that's the wrong note. It
Well,
doesn't, yeah, it just has that, oh, that's
yeah.
it's not it.
Do you feel like there's some defensiveness in that note? Is that, or some protection of the modality or the practice or?
It could be. I think also just some people like, oh, I spent all this time getting like so great in this one thing. Now you're telling
Right.
me I have to learn all this other stuff and I don't want to.
Right.
It seems
Right.
like a big task on one level. It is, I suppose.
Hmm.
But also in another way, we're okay to paradox here as we were saying earlier, like in another way, it just simplifies everything.
I agree. I
It actually
agree.
makes
Yeah.
it, I think, way more easeful.
Yeah. Just have to go past that hump of the, oh, what do
Yeah.
you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But less and less of it. I find I get less and less of that, maybe here and there, but it used to be
Yeah.
a little more of it. Now it seems to be lessening.
I find, I mean, if my guess is if someone's coming to you, there's already a curiosity of something different, right?
Yeah.
So it's yeah, when people are in this place where they know they want more, they or there's this interest in more, that there's already a part of them at least that knows. It's just the part that's holding on so tight to all the hard work they've done or the modality that they practice and the way they move through life. It's like, why would I let go of this?
Yeah.
Don't make me do something different. So yeah.
Yeah, and this whole question of like, well, if we're all these parts, who am I? It's like I would say like the conductor and the symphony. Like to
Yes.
me, the
Yeah.
the true self is again wholeness. It's really a dynamic multiplicity that's integrated.
Yes. Yeah.
And so yeah, you're the woodwinds and the orchestra and the brass and like the whole and the person that the triangle thing.
Yeah.
There's a little character
Totally.
that plays the triangle and it's fun.
Even the person who packs up
Right,
everyone's gear
right. There's
afterwards back in the
all
car. Like it's
this,
a
yeah,
full team.
it's a full team.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
when we have this more like, let's have our team, let's have our inner family be healthy and functioning and happy and peaceful with each other,
Yeah.
there's a lot more creativity that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. The creativity and the ease. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I could keep talking forever. And I do have one more piece that I'm like, oh, we could weave this in or we could leave it. You have a sense?
Well, what is it? I'd be curious to hear what it is.
I it's we've already in a way talked about it, but not with these words. Weaving in the knowledge of like more of a head practice, a heart practice, a gut practice, the
Mm,
the
mm,
uh, I mean, we've already spoken to it, just not
mm,
from this
mhm,
perspective, right? So,
mm.
and this is one of the things that I love. Like, you go on your Substacks, and the
Right.
amount of information I'm like, I listen to your Substack sometimes. I'm like, what? How did he studies this too? Like, what?
Yeah.
Um, and I love how many different maps you bring into the picture because it does allow
Mm,
people to, find the map that resonates and
right.
find their own way into discovering their own maps and their own perspectives. That to me is really important, right? Like offer up as many maps as possible so people can find their own understanding and their own perspectives, their own experience of themselves and yeah, so one of the other maps I've heard you speak to is that head and the heart and the gut. So if you want to dive into that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I I appreciate you pointing out the thing about maps, which is maps aren't the territory,
Hmm.
but it is really nice to have a nice map if you're going somewhere.
It really is.
It
Yeah.
is. Good maps. Not a
Yeah.
not a crappy map
Yeah.
doesn't help,
Yeah.
but
No.
when the GPS is off, that's just
Yeah.
leads you to the wrong
When
place.
you have Google Maps on a
Right,
bike route and
right,
you get
yeah,
sent on
right,
down all the dead ends. Yeah, that's happened.
yeah, yeah. So to me, these are the maps that usually come out there on the site are like to me ones that have like deep wisdom and deep legacy to them. There's update, terms of all the somatic regulation pieces that
Mhm.
we named. But they are maps to me that have been around for a long time because I think they speak to something of perennial and true preserved wisdom that's been
Mhm.
passed down. We might want to update some things, but I think there's a lot of legacy and honoring in a good way without being fundamentalists about it.
Yeah. And holding on tight just to one or
Yeah.
two
Oh,
maps.
this is the final
This is the
one. This is
way.
the yeah. No, that's no good.
Yeah.
That's obviously no good. But it's also not like, oh, we're modern people and we're past all like no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. And all
Far
those
from.
people who go, oh no, 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 no. These people spent thousands of years exploring the nature of things like
Mhm.
energy and consciousness. I'm pretty sure we should not just throw it out.
Yeah.
No.
No,
So,
especially if you're doing it with such ignorance. You might want to
yeah.
check yourself.
Yeah, there's some accrued wisdom over millennia.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
head, heart, and gut is, one way of a nice way of, uh, again, it's like the three in one, whether it's self, soul, spirit, head, heart, and gut. There's something nice just about, like in the fairy tales, it's always like the third, there's always the three brothers or three sisters. There's
Uh-huh.
something mnemonically about that, but it's enough complexity that it's not overly simplistic, but it's not so complicated that nobody can remember it with systems of like there's 115 different things. And like, well, I can't track that. Like
I can retain three. That's it.
three's good number. It's good balance.
Yeah.
So those three main sort of locations of the body, and they're being used as kind of biological correlates in a good way. We don't have to be super strict about it, but as each of those three open up, they tend to have characteristic qualities associated with them.
Mhm.
And again, a more integrative or wholeness oriented version is going to say all of the above. Like, we're going to be interested in this one and this one and this one, not this one versus this one or that one. So, head spaces when there's kind of flow and ease and clarity brought to the head or the mind space, you tend to get imagery like clarity, awareness will be kind of the language, like illumination,
Mhm.
feeling of like the mind being very open, clear, deep perspective, the up on the mountaintop, panoramic kind of view. And that's really lovely so long as we don't make that the final, like you're only going to go live up on the mountaintop. That's like the
Mhm.
classic, like, oh, I've reached the mountaintop. Now I'm just going to stay up here because it's so lovely up here.
Yeah.
Like, well, there's stuff down on the ground and in the valley too. So, but if we allow it to be what it is, again, true, but also partial, and that not be a problem, but that be like a good thing,
Mhm.
then mind spaces is really nice to have clarity. So when people are saying, get out of your head and get into your body, I would say, like, imagine a body without a head. What do you call that?
Mhm.
A chicken with its
Dead.
head cut off.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
That's a problem. So if someone's saying the head is not the body, we got a problem, right?
Yeah,
We got a serious
exactly.
fear brains up there.
Yeah.
Obviously, if the person thinks that their whole sense of their self is this little guy or person inside their forehead that's like like the Flintstones where he's like and then we've got the like levers of the making the dinosaur go and the quarry, like that's a problem if you
Yeah.
approach yourself that way, that your body is just some mechanical robot or levers that you're moving around. That's a problem.
Which do you find like in the Buddhist practice, for example, everything is the mind?
Mm.
Is that a component of that, or would you say that's different?
I think mind there is probably more like what we would tend to say is consciousness,
Mm, okay.
not mind like your usual
Thinking
like
mind.
thinking mind, like, oh, what time do I gotta get the thing or what's
Yeah.
whatever, but like consciousness.
Mm.
awareness.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. That feels very different.
And so when the mind opens, it tends to have that experience of like really deep awareness,
Yes.
really deep, beautiful consciousness
Yeah. And of the
and
infinite
lucidity.
consciousness and yeah.
Yeah, like that
Yeah.
there's a mind, there's a wisdom to life. Like
Yeah. I am
the
my body. I'm not my body. I am my mind. I'm not my mind.
yeah, the Tao, you know, the plant knows to just reach for the sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
The baby just knows to reach for the mother.
Yeah.
Like there's a wisdom to life that if we could get out of the way,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, like the stream of life wants to actually be a current. It actually wants to live and it knows how to live.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the kind of stuff that tends to arise when there's a very head or if you like mind oriented and again beautiful a deep part deep true and also its potential limitation is that it's you want to stay up on the mountain and
Mm-hmm.
one might want to stay up in the place where everything is infinite and it's all serene and everything's perfect and that's wonderful and then there's
Mm-hmm.
actually like stuff on the street and there's you know that can be like a kind of safe zone to be in the you know infinite and consciousness
Mm-hmm.
and
It can lead to a bypassing way of being in the world. Is that
for sure
accurate
it can
statement?
definitely be like a safe zone to hide out
Yeah. Yeah.
when classically when awakening goes from the head down into the heart it's a different ball game at that point
Mm.
because then all the things like our emotions and our as you said earlier our joy and our grief and the more of the one equals the more of the other and they're a package deal like that all comes online if the heart opens
Yeah.
joy and sorrow you know and as a whole other game um there's a famous saying by a great zen master dogen that enlightenment is intimacy with all things
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah.
so the key word there is intimacy.
Yeah.
So gonna become intimate with grief, gonna become intimate with fear, become intimate with rage and anger and
Yeah.
humanity and our longings for attachment and our jealousies and our heartbreaks and our beauties and our hopes and our tender places and our vulnerabilities and like yeah
Yeah.
and
And it makes me think of what we spoke to earlier about the edges there. I'm aware, like, as we shift from talking about the head, and I could feel that experience. Now that we're talking about the heart, I'm like, oh, there's my
ooh
edges in
yeah
that. I feel it.
yeah
Feel the edge that I can hang out in and explore in my, 5%. And it's like there's the real rawness in that. At least that's my experience.
yeah
It's just like, oh,
it's pathos
yeah, yeah,
it's it's intrinsically tender
yeah.
and you're and again back to our earlier point that the emotions and the sensation and the felt sense of the body sets the pace
Hmm.
and is never to be overridden
Hmm.
is exactly the point of titration and assimilation. It's not just like dive into the heart, rip all
Yeah,
that stuff out. Like
yeah. Hell
no.
no. Yeah,
It's like dip your toe in,
yeah,
get your ankle, like
yeah,
really
yeah.
take a break. Like those are warm but also raw waters. They're beautiful
Mhm.
ones, but they are for sure intrinsically visceral.
Yeah. It makes
And
me for
sorry,
me.
just to say last, like it the
Yeah,
body has to assimilate
yeah,
to that, and it has to be done in a way that actually honors the pace.
yeah. I agree, 100%. What I'm experiencing in this moment around it is like a simmering in the entering into that. Yeah, I've been entering into for a long time, but I feel like I
Mhm.
just have a little toe in, but like there's this simmering there before taking the next niggle forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah.
So there's a lot there. And
Mhm.
traditions that emphasize things like devotion come from a very heart-oriented space. Some
Mhm.
people love their Rumi and their Hafez and their Sufis who are drunk in ecstasy and love of God and life. And, that's lovely. And so in that heart space, there's a lot of celebration and ecstasy, and also other poems are about the deep lament. And because when the heart opens up that way, that's where immense compassion comes from,
Mhm. Mhm.
to really see feel the profound depths of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as much as we can handle for a bit, you
Mhm.
know, the
Mhm.
mind might see it, be aware of it. The heart has more of the feel tone associated in that. That definitely turns up the temperature.
Yeah. And there's something in the feeling to me that's like the feeling. Oh, how do I put words to this? I guess that there's a feeling of the. There's. I feel it from a place of. Oh, this is the story of my life. The feeling it and then putting art, being able to articulate it is like, oh, how do I do that? I guess what I want to say is it's not me being, you know, entangled in the feeling of it,
Yeah,
right? So seeing the
yeah,
pain of the world and being entangled in it and feeling like I have to do something about it and
right.
like taking on everyone else's stuff, it's not that. I can tell you what it's not. So I just wanted to name that as like when we
Hmm.
feel that, it's not that we're feeling everyone else's pieces.
Yeah.
It's more just we are it. We are it, but we're not engrossed by it or taken
Hmm.
down by it, or it has a different quality. If you have words for that, let me know because I can't
Yeah,
find
that's
them.
really
But
brilliant. That's really important and subtle what you're pointing out. Um, in the spiritual traditions, the classic image for this dimension we're talking about is like the great all-loving mother,
mm,
like
yeah,
a Mother Mary or a Kuan Yin or someone.
yeah.
And so that feeling of a mother or a ultra-loving parent who would be holding a child that's like having a tantrum or a fit
Hmm.
or scrape their knee or whatever, they're not, as you said, taken down by it.
Hmm.
They're there and fundamentally steady and are a safe space, and then the child can cry and be held and then relax.
Yeah.
And so it's something like that, I think.
Kind of like the empathic witness, but in the sorrow and in that love. Like it's those layers, right? It's just like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And again, it's not by our efforting and our will. We're really talking here about like the spiritual parts of us that already somehow know to do that,
Yes. Yeah.
and just kind of
Exactly.
relaxing into that a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the heart is a fascinating one, and the traditions of Tantra and alchemy come from here,
Mm.
like fear is now our teacher and anger is my teacher. And, like the things that arise in our experience are already connected because of intimacy with all things. We're not
Yeah.
looking to be like, I'm the good spiritual student and I only feel this stuff and I don't feel that stuff and I only do
Yeah.
this and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, welcome to humanity.
Yeah.
Welcome to
Exactly. Back to humanity.
welcome to the whole human conditioning gamut
Uh-huh.
here,
Uh-huh.
and to look to have it embraced by and pervaded by unconditional love.
Mhm.
And that does create some alchemy, that does create some magic,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
it's
It
being
does.
embraced by love. It's not being overwritten or anything,
Exactly. Yeah.
including our desires and our sexuality and all the fun,
Yes.
like all the juicy. It's like
Yeah.
all of it gets to be part of the equation.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And then the gut.
Hmm.
So, this one too has its own kind of visceral or raw quality, but it's a bit different than the heart. The heart has more of the like joy mixed with sorrow and compassion and all that. The God is more like just some of the really raw and primordial forms of like yes and no to life.
Mm.
Like a raw, like then death and the mystery of existence, like just full stop. So as it begins to unravel in the space of wholeness, its characteristic qualities are like the ground of being or like complete silence and stillness. So not actually a lot that can be such a sense. It's just really, really quiet.
Hmm.
But it also means encountering like not just at a feeling tone, but at a gut level tone. You know, primordial sensations of contraction and this is again why titration is so and no there's no argument here like somebody should go to one it like that's not the
Hmm.
argument I was like but just to say hey here's a map and if somebody already happens to find themselves for whatever sets of reasons undergoing this kind of thing here's a map to help support somebody
Yeah.
in such a process yeah it's a space of pretty raw fear that
Mm.
needs to be befriended. And but also on the other side of that is a lot of serenity and a deep sort of yes to life.
Mm.
But you get to it by first finding the no
Yeah,
and making friends with that and not trying to fix it and not trying to change it, all the things we've been saying. And like
exactly.
and that's an interesting process to be sure.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
something does release there that allows us to feel like wonder and awe and a sense of real luminosity in existence.
Mm. The word that keeps showing up for me in it too is like just beingness. Like
Yeah,
it's a real beingness to it.
yeah.
Uh,
To really settle down into the root of our being and really sit in our seat and be like, I'm actually here and I'm
mhm.
present and accounted for and like an immovable stillness in our being, a real still point or center point that's the winds can whatever, the three little pigs, the one who built the house out of bricks, like
Yeah.
the wolf
Yeah.
can howl and whatever, but that house like coming down.
It's not going anywhere. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
going through that map, sharing the pieces there. For me, like having conversations like this, or like this is where I love reading when I'm ready to read a certain
Mhm.
thing. This is like the Gene Keys is a great example of that. Like I read something, and those that don't know about Gene Keys, that's another episode, but
Right.
just reading in general.
Right.
It's like when I read a nugget and it lands in such a way where
Mhm.
there's an embodied knowing of the
Yeah.
information, right? And that's really my hopes with this podcast too, is like
Mhm.
as we're having these conversations, that it's not just information that's being retained, but that there's this opportunity for people to notice if there's an actual response that they have when they hear us talk about this stuff, right? So it's like, ooh, that headpiece, that being up in the mountain, like, oh yeah, I know that, and I can now have more words to it and understand it more consciously. Or now I have this curiosity around the heart and the rawness there, and and yeah. So my hopes are that our conversation, in many ways, because we covered a lot, has poked something internal that has sparked a deeper understanding of someone's experience. And um I know you'll be back on this podcast. I mean, I hope you
Oh.
will, but
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
um is there anything else you wanted to name or share before we wrap up?
Just a thing to just wanted to highlight or reinforce a point that I think came up many, many times and just keep circling back to it because it it goes so against the grain of the cultural conditioning.
Mm.
Again, whether that's secular conditioning or spiritual personal growth conditioning, like it shows up kind of all over the place with different versions,
Yeah.
is that the first step is fundamental nurturance and self-acceptance and
Mm.
really unconditional positive okayness and like well-beingness as the space of actual transformation.
Mhm.
Then the
Uh,
alchemy really happens. Then
Yeah,
things can actually move and evolve, and they do. And then there is courage, and there is like all that stuff still gets to be there,
totally. Does it
but
ever?
it's coming from a place that feels that's like it's been marinated in nourishment.
Hmm. And
And
for
I think
those
that's
people,
so underappreciated. Sorry.
yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely underappreciated. I was just gonna say for those people that are like, but how do I do that?
Yeah. Okay. How do I? Okay. I'll set up my
What are the steps?
my seven magical. Yeah. It's really more. I know that's a go. Yeah. It is the classic conundrum or paradox, but
Uh-huh.
it's really more about giving ourselves a green light to have the current experience that we have.
Mhm.
So long as I will add with a caveat, so long as that experience is not like in full on dysregulation. That would be a specific different thing. And then there's like emergency protocol scenario. But assuming we're
Yeah,
not talking about that, we're just talking about every day, we're all trying to do our best kind of thing and having our ups and downs, whatever.
yeah.
Then the green light to actually just, it's actually okay to feel whatever you're feeling,
Mhm.
or as much of it as you can feel. And even if
Mhm.
that means you're not feeling a lot at the moment,
Just witness
um,
that.
start there. And it's a warm witness. I think that's an important point to make here with the
Mhm.
nurturance. It's a witnessing that's intimacy with all things, to use
Mhm.
fancy language. Like it's a witness that's not way up on the mountaintop, far away, looking in a kind of clinical way. Oh, okay, noted. There are feelings. Uh-huh. Whatever. Like, I
But
think,
notice the protection in between
yeah.
the feelings and you sitting on the top of the mountain.
Yeah. It's a closeness. It's a very warm, befriending, welcoming being with curiosity, warm curiosity.
Yeah.
And that is something we can slowly cultivate.
Mhm.
It's also, as it turns out, in a graceful way, it's actually part of our organic makeup as humans.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
So
why,
we're really just trying to relearn a native language, or we're trying to
yeah.
reconnect to a part of us that maybe has gone to sleep a little bit or got trained out of us, but it's not learning something new. It's just helping to reinvigorate something that's organic to our being.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's why I really like the words the empathic witness, because people
Mm,
can relate a little bit to like what that might feel like, right? Or
mm,
what that might be like. And it's like, okay, like it's in us all to be
mm.
that. We just have to
Yeah,
remember how to create the space to find that or be that again.
yeah.
Yeah. So beautiful.
Beautiful indeed.
And my guess would be that, the more people listen to content that resonates with them, accessing that, like that's why I'm so grateful for your Substacks, like the endless opportunities that you invite people to access that is, yeah. You can get lost on Chris's Substacks for sure.
Well, it's 20,
But
20. I started my process a bit young, somewhere 16, pretty seriously. So it's coming up on 30 years now of pretty
wow.
intense investigation. So this is kind of my opportunity to give back as a way of saying thanks for all the teachers and learnings I've had over the years and all the support I've had over the years, which has been immense. And just to try to like, and in particular, like, just don't do it the way I like. It's the best thing, right?
Totally.
Like, don't do
Don't
it the
follow
way,
Chris's steps.
don't do it the way I did it. I did it out of order, but I mean, if people do, I can't control that. But it's
Yeah.
generally it's an argument for like it doesn't have to go as topsy turvy as it was for me.
Mhm.
And
Well, thanks for
there's
doing it topsy-turvy
yeah,
so we can learn not to.
not to do been some negative learning. But that's my hope over the next however long it takes me, a couple of years or whatever it is, and I'll have a strict time frame, but basically to try to put back out everything I've ever learned essentially and leave that as kind of
Your
it's good.
legacy.
Yeah, something like
Or
that.
the legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so helpful. So thank you. Thank you for sharing.
And I'm so excited for you. And this is such a cool, I mean, you're so gifted in this. So it's just a natural fit. So it's so great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be showing up in this way, especially after the last 3+ years of just like, whoa, who the hell am I? Really? What is happening here? What is this human experience? Yeah, so grateful to be coming out of the other side. Maybe we'll see what happens.
Well, you're creating. That's a very good
Yes.
indicator.
Yeah, exactly. Even though it's pulling teeth sometimes, but it's happening. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me and hope everyone
Yeah.
finds that really a blessing. Yeah, I wish peace for everybody.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that this episode has provided you with new perspectives and insights. And if you haven't already, head to my website to download the experiential guide. Until the next time, I invite you to continue to pause and notice.